won't work on a more important project than this one. I think for whatever reasons, our revolution is sort of encrusted with the barnacles of sentimentality and nostalgia. It's a huge, violent civil war, but we accept the violence of our own civil war and the 20th century wars we've been in, but we kind of want to protect the big ideas of the revolution by not getting into the inconvenient facts of it. And they don't in any way diminish the big ideas. They make them just better and more exhilarating and more inspiring. And so we've spent the last nearly 10 years telling the story of the American Revolution.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. That was probably the world's greatest documentary filmmaker, in my opinion, Ken Burns, returning to the show for the third time, talking about his new doc series, American Revolution, coming out in the fall, and just always amazing to have him on. I love his passion when he talks about whatever the subject matter is he's making a film about, and that was him talking about how he wanted to wipe away the sentimentality around the idea of the American Revolution, barbecues and fireworks and all of that and celebration, which is great. But his series really drills down into the dark side of it. And, that it was essentially a civil war. You had loyalists on one side, patriots fighting against the king on the other. Here, all in America. It's a really, really great conversation. Excited to have him on. Before we get to the full interview, on tour with my show, Permission to Speak, directed by the great Frank Oz. You can go on my website, paulmecurio.com, for tics and all of that good stuff. We're all over the place. And just a quick observation. I've noticed there's this thing, I guess, with iPhones now where you can indicate that you've read my text. So if I send you a text, I'll see that you read it. Why would you want to put that on your phone and activate that? The great thing about text is people don't know if you read it or not. So now I would never click on that so that it shows if I read it, because then I can't lie to you and say, oh, I missed your text when I was just avoiding you. Or like you wanted me to go out, but I was too tired. And I didn't want to say I was too tired. So instead I ignored it and then said, oh, I missed it. I didn't see it till the next day. Sometimes you need a little wiggle room to, tell a little white lie. Not activating the old, quote-unquote, red option. So if you text me, you're kind of in the dark if I read it or not. And that's the way I like it. All right. Anyway, enjoy Ken Burns. He's amazing and so honored to have him on again. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And his doc series just on the American Revolution just sounds and seems amazing from what I've seen. All right. Enjoy Ken Burns. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Very excited to have my next guest returning to the show, Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Ken Burns, who has directed and produced some of the most acclaimed historical documentaries ever made, including the Civil War, baseball, jazz, the war, national parks. It goes on. And very excited to have him on talking about his next major project, the American Revolution. It's a 6-part, 12-hour documentary series, explores the country's founding struggle, this 8-year war for independence. It's going to premiere Sunday, November 16th, and air for 6 consecutive nights through Friday, November 21st at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time on PBS. So great to have you back on the show, Ken. Thank you.
It's great to be back, Paul, and we're also streaming it instantaneously so people can watch it whenever and however they'd prefer to do it. It may be appointment viewing. I hope it is, but I also think it's also at your convenience viewing. Let me just cut right to this. I won't work on a more important project than this.
Wow.
I think for whatever reasons, our revolution is sort of encrusted with the barnacles of sentimentality and nostalgia. It's a huge, violent civil war, but we accept the violence of our own civil war and the 20th century wars we've been in, but we kind of want to protect the big ideas of the revolution by not getting into the inconvenient facts of it. And they don't in any way diminish the big ideas. They make them just better and more exhilarating and more inspiring. And so we've spent the last nearly 10 years telling the story of the American Revolution. It isn't just Lexington and Concord, and then you drop to Trenton, and then you surrender at Yorktown. This is a deep, complicated thing in which all the familiar figures are there, but now dimensional and human, and introduce you to dozens of other people, from 15-year-old kids who volunteer for the Continental Army and fight through the war, to the British occupation of New York and Charleston and Savannah that goes on well after Yorktown, to what's happening on the borders with Native people, the fact that it turns into a global war with not just the addition of the French, but the Spanish and the Dutch who come in on our side, so that people are fighting in the Mediterranean and in the Caribbean and out in South Asia and the Philippines. I mean, it is a dramatic story. And we have a third-person narrator, but we have a first-person voice bringing to life Josh Brolin and Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep and Samuel L. Jackson and Morgan Freeman and Damian Lewis and Sir Kenneth Branagh and Claire Danes and Laura Linney and Matthew Rhys and Domhnall Gleeson. And, I've named maybe a tenth of the voices. It's the best cast that's ever been assembled. And they're off camera reading these true historical voices that bring to life the story of our American Revolution, the most important event, I believe, in world history since the birth of Christ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about that these projects for you are a process of discovery. You've talked about how you thought you knew about baseball, and then every day was daily humiliation.
Yes.
You say, quote, "I don't want to tell stories about what I know. That's homework." And whenever we've talked about your work, I always ask, what did you come out learning from it yourself? And one of the things you pointed out, and I never thought of it this way, and I like to consider myself somebody who knows a bit about American history, it's our Civil War. You say our Civil War is a sectional war, but the Revolution was our Civil War. Talk about that a little bit, because it's a really great point.
So everywhere from New Hampshire to Georgia, there are people who are loyalists. And we're umpires calling balls and strikes in this story. We're happy that the United States was created. It's a big deal. But, you're not going to make a villain out of somebody who's essentially a conservative, saying, look, the British constitutional monarchy is responsible for my prosperity. Why would I change and go with these foolhardy ideas of democracy? This is crazy. But you're within the midst of people who don't think it's crazy, and they fight each other constantly. There's some battles in South Carolina where there's no British officer involved. It's just Americans killing Americans, and often civilians are the casualties. There's very few civilian deaths outside of Missouri in our Civil War. 2 at Gettysburg, less than 20 at the siege of Atlanta, less than 10 at the siege of Vicksburg. I mean, that's nothing. That's just nothing. And there yet thousands of people. We have one spectacular moment. Maybe this will drive it home for you, where we've been following a loyalist through a few episodes. And at the Battle of Bennington, which is a British defeat, a loyalist regiment attached to Burgoyne's army, led by this guy named John Peters, who we've been following, is on a redoubt, a breastwork, trying to defend it from the Patriots who are going to overwhelm him, and he'll be wounded and escape. But he is, as he said, forced to oblige to kill. That is to say, with his right hand, his pistol fires into the head of his best friend, who has already, growing up, who has already stuck a bayonet into him and has been deflected by the rib cage. So that is the American Revolution in one nutshell, that John Peters destroys his good friend growing up in New Haven named Jeremiah Post at the Battle of Bennington. And that tells you a little bit about the dynamics of the American Revolution. And that's a civil war. And their families, Lucy Knox, who marries Henry Knox, the great guy for whom Fort Knox is at, the general who brings the cannon from Ticonderoga to Washington that drives the British out of Boston. Her father and mother and brother and sisters stay behind. They're loyalists. She loses her entire family. Benjamin Franklin's own son, the deposed royal governor of New Jersey, is sent to prison in Connecticut and then released in the middle of the revolution, presuming he'll sail back to England. Instead, he starts a terrorist organization that kill patriots in New Jersey, just as there are patriot organizations that kill loyalists in New Jersey. So this is a complicated thing. And in the midst of it are all the best ideas.
Right.
Here people have been subjects, and now we're going to be citizens. That's the great gift. So my film is simply an attempt to put the us back in the U.S.
That's a great way of putting it. And you make reference to New Jersey and South Carolina, and you say it was as bad as South Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. And it's incredible when you put it in that context. You don't really think of it that way.
Well, I made a film about the Vietnam War, and before the ink was dry on that, I decided to do the revolution in large measure because we had an American soldier who wrote back home. He didn't survive the war, but he wrote back home and he said to his mom, as I go through, I realized that if I was a Vietnamese, I'd be on the side of the Viet Cong because it's sort of like the British, and the American patriots. And another soldier walking through a village that they're occupying, he said, this must, in the stares they were getting, he said, this must what it had been like for a British soldier walking through Ipswich, Massachusetts. So there were all these constant things. In fact, the British referred to New Jersey as pacified, and then it wasn't pacified. And then they referred to South Carolina as pacified, and then it wasn't pacified. That's the language that we used in the 60s about different provinces in Vietnam, different areas in Vietnam. And I realized I don't know anything about my revolution. I've got the superficial knowledge I got in 3rd grade and 8th grade and 11th grade, but I want to know more.
Yeah.
And that's why we spent, all this time diving deeply. We're 9 years and 6 months into it and another 6 months to go.
That's great. Just to wrap up real quickly, David Schmidt, one of the producers on the documentary, talks about the word uncertainty. The revolution was 8 years of uncertainty, hope, and terror. And again, same with me, you learn this going since you're 6, 7, 8 years old about the revolution. Talk about very quickly the uncertainty that these people lived with.
Yeah, really good point. And David Schmidt is a co-director and co-producer. And what it means is that those people who are in it, they don't know they're George Washington. Right. Their name's George Washington, but they don't know they're the father of the country. Thomas Jefferson doesn't know he's going to become Thomas Jefferson. You don't know how it's going to turn out. There's all that uncertainty and contingency. And so good history telling, we already know how it turns out.
Right.
Spoiler alert, right?
Right.
Battle of Yorktown, we win, right? They surrender. But every moment up to that, it's not clear it's going to win. And even in just the months preceding it, because the British have captured and occupied Charleston, as they have also occupied New York now for 5 years and will still occupy it 2 years after the war is over, with thousands of British troops and loyalists in the city. It's only until 1783 that Washington finally gets to take over the city he lost in the summer of 76. You don't know. And good history is staying tuned because, and this is funny, David McCullough told me this, it might not turn out the way you know it did. Right? Go to Ford's Theater this time and maybe Booth's gun jams, right? You just go realizing in a good story that this is not clear to them the way it's clear to us in retrospect. Right. That's a luxury of hindsight.
Yeah.
But to them, if you can put people into the mindset of the people there, you can hear Washington's discouragement and then his fortitude and his resilience. Boy, you begin to see what kind of person he is, and you begin to realize no matter how many subsidiary characters there are, no matter how complex the story you tell, we still don't have a country without George Washington.
Yep.
And that's Stop the Press's news.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, your work is so important. It's extremely well done, but it's so important. American Revolution, 6-part, 12-hour documentary series, premieres Sunday, November 16th, and airs for 6 consecutive nights through Friday, November 21st, and can be streamed beginning Sunday, November 16th at pbs.org. So wonderful to have you on again. Thank you for all the work you do. And I guess I'm assuming you'll make it by the late show at some point, so I'll come say hi to you when you come visit. Take care, my friend. Thank you.
I will be there. Thank you, Paul, so much. Remember, put the us back into the U.S.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. There you go. Ken Burns. Amazing. Follow me at Paul Mecurio on the old social media platforms. PaulMecurio.com for tickets to my shows on the road. And hope you all are doing great. And I will see you next week with another podcast, everybody.